Laura, very good to have you with us. I just want to begin by getting your reaction to those comments that we've seen there on the podium from those two leaders.
Yeah, I've in decades of working in the region, covering the region, living there, working for peace, hoping for better days. I've just never been so surprised. Fresh thinking is how they put it. Far-fetched is how most would respond. I have to say, though, what sounds like, nails on a chalkboard to many people's ears across the region is kind of Beethoven's Ode to Joy to Netanyahu's right-wing coalition. So what I'm just wondering is if this is all part of a negotiating strategy. The two master hagglers, Netanyahu and Trump, went into a room and they tried to figure out a way, basically, for each man to emerge victorious. So on that ceasefire deal, Trump gave Netanyahu a way to kind of say that the war is over, but he's going to end the war by ending the very people who live there. So that could be potentially a way out for Netanyahu. We've often asked, how can he sort of allay the sort of demands of the right-wing coalition without bolting, so that Netanyahu can declare the war over. So perhaps Trump is saying if the people are gone, there's no war to fight. Trump also got what he wanted from Netanyahu, which was that unequivocal love song, which he wanted to hear, that Trump was the greatest president Israel ever saw. And that's exactly what Netanyahu said. And the other thing was Trump's been state shopping, right? We saw that with Greenland, with Panama. He seems to with Canada. It sounds like somebody's finally willing to give up a piece of territory, not that it's theirs to give. But Trump found his state. And look, I've been to Gaza many, many times. There are beautiful beaches. I understand why somebody might want to grab it. Part of me also wonders if somewhere behind the scenes there are Gulf developers. It sounded a lot like UAE. I'm not saying that they're behind this at all, but I'm just saying that the vision of Gaza, Rafah, the Riviera of the Middle East, that sounded a lot like the UAE, where you just have a lot of people there having a good time and making money.
But Laura, by the same token, we know that Egypt, Jordan, for example, had said previously they would be vehemently opposed to Palestinians leaving Gaza. For Saudi Arabia, for example, and the normalization of ties with Israel, that would be contingent on a Palestinian state, for example, in the Gaza Strip. So Donald Trump can say this, but do you think the neighborhood Arab countries would allow this?
It's, fantastic, most important question. I mean, before their meeting in the press conference, somebody asked him that question and kind of Trump said, well, we solve problems and they won't say no. And I have to say the voice that he used, he sounded like Marlon Brando, Corleone in The Godfather. He even referenced Mexico. He seems to be trying this kind of, offer you can't refuse approach in his foreign affairs. We'll see how far that takes him. I have a feeling he might find his first closed door in the Middle East, but we'll have to see.
And in terms of a tactic or a strategy then from Donald Trump when faced with that opposition, what do you think that could look like? Diplomacy or something more?
Right. No, I don't think, the guy doesn't want to fight. He wants to finance Trump Inc. So if this doesn't work out, he'll find another way. Look, you see already his approach to Iran. It was relatively, he's talking about maximum pressure, maximum sanctions, but Israel wants military strikes. So, he is able to dial back. I don't think that he's warmongering. He's, way out of his depth in terms of cultural understanding of the Middle East. It is after all the Holy Land, to many faiths, and that's part of the reason why it's been so problematic.
And just looking then, for example, at the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, the two men on that stage did appear to be putting on a united front. Do you think that reflects their relationship behind closed doors? When we know, for example, as you were just pointing to, Donald Trump has said that he doesn't want to see more fighting in the Middle East. At the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, speaking on that stage, that Israel would be victorious in the war, and that essentially they would finish the job when it comes to defeating Hamas militarily. So are these two men aligned?
Well, I think it was very interesting. The first thing Netanyahu did when he took that podium was he wiped his face. He was sweating. That was a tough meeting. We saw what they said publicly, but I'd be fascinated to hear, what happens, what the leaks are when we find out what really happened in that meeting. In the press conference before the meeting, what Netanyahu said is the most important thing is that there be no daylight between us. And again, I think that was a plea not to open up kind of the rift between them. Yes, they buried the hatchet, but I think it's a shallow grave.
And let's just talk a little bit more then in terms of how you think all of this will go down in the United States. When Congress, for example, the State Department has been listening to all of this, I mean, do you anticipate any opposition in Washington to what we've been hearing tonight?
Well, it's fantastically inconsistent, but inconsistency is kind of Trump's brand. I mean, he has been talking about, there's been this kind of pull between the isolationist wing of the Republican Party and the annexationist. But when we said annexationist, we thought it was Israel that was going to talk about annexing. So to find out that not only are we putting boots on the ground in the Middle East, but they're going to be construction boots, permanent boots. Yes, I think everybody's a bit gobsmacked. But this is what Trump does. He introduces a kind of wild idea, and slowly it's normalized. I think ultimately he tries to get away with what he can get away with. And as he says, you do what you have to do. So if he can make it work, he will.
And, lastly, and I was talking about this with Tom as well, the fact that there is meant to be these discussions with regards to the second phase of ceasefire negotiations when it comes to Gaza. And I was speaking earlier to the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations as well, Danny Danon. And he was saying, essentially, if we need to go back in, we will. I mean, where do you think the status of those negotiations and the prospects of an enduring, lasting peace stand tonight after everything that we've heard?
Well, this press conference blows it all up, because Danny Danon was saying, we'd like to have the leadership of Hamas deported. And now Trump comes out and said, we'd like to have all the people out. So again, it's just like he's almost leapfrogged over the most right-wing members of the Israeli cabinet to come up with his own plan, which is a real estate-based plan. It's a real estate guy's view of the Middle East. So I think that one door he left open, which is fascinating, which is the West Bank, or as Israelis might call it, Judea and Samaria. So is there some kind of master plan trade-off where you give, Palestinians a statelet, a mini state in the West Bank? Is that what he's thinking? Or is he using Gaza as a way to sort of pressure Netanyahu? Is he trading that for Iran? That Israel doesn't launch a military strike on Iran, or some kind of concessions towards Saudi Arabia and that grand bargain. I mean, the road to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia has always been through Rafah for Netanyahu. It was showing that he was strong, right? Countries don't make treaties with the weak. Netanyahu always felt like he had to reassert his military superiority to get Saudi Arabia's attention again. And Trump, is right on board with that, peace through strength.
Well, let's touch a little bit then on Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump there saying in that press conference that he believed that there would be further countries joining the Abraham Accords soon. Of course, the complicated part in this puzzle is that Saudi Arabia has always maintained that normalization of ties would be possible with a recognition of a Palestinian state. So how realistic do you think that proposal is? Benjamin Netanyahu saying that had Trump been the president in the last administration, it would be done already. How much credence do you give to that?
Well, the other problem is that the Abraham Accords were negotiated in secret, right? And it was sort of a surprise. So you didn't have to deal with domestic constituencies and pushback from the Israeli side, or more importantly, from the Arab states. This is all out in the public. This is all in the open. And that was like a really big mistake that Biden's administration made. And Hamas jumped in. They weren't at that negotiating table. They poisoned the meal with the October 7th attack. They upset the table. So I think it's a very dangerous time that we're facing. I know one of your correspondent mentioned that it's the middle of the night across the Middle East. I think people are awake, and I can almost hear the gasps and from here all the way from the United States. I think it's going to be a very dangerous period and more fragile than ever.
And kind of overarchingly, I guess, my question when it comes to US foreign policy, of course, Donald Trump is known for making grand statements, you might say, but do you think this fundamentally signifies a shift in US foreign policy, one, for example, that would alter the status quo in terms of the commitment and belief to a two-state solution and the support of the governance of a Palestinian state?
Well, I would say so, except he was very clear in response to a journalist question. They asked, "Do you still support the two-state solution?" And he was not willing to discount that. So that's, you know, I'm just going to follow that tiny little crack. He's left the door open for that. So maybe he has something in mind for the West Bank. I don't know.
And just on those,
But they say, in Arabic, Allahu Ya'araf. At this point, it's Trump and Allahu, Allah knows. I mean, I'm gobsmacked. I'm sure many of you viewers are as well.
and it really is striking to see the fact that tonight, after your years of experience working in this arena, that there are things that can still come out of left field and surprise you in this way. So were there not rumblings of this, in these first few days of the Trump administration? And do you think, in terms of the region, does this raise tensions further in the Middle East?
Well, it's the kind of thing that when I worked at the State Department under President Obama, you couldn't have even said out loud if you wanted to keep your job. It was just inadmissible, unacceptable. I do think that it could potentially destabilize. It depends on, if there's going to be public demonstrations or how much is actually just, is this pie in the sky or is this policy? I think the coming days are going to tell us which way it's going to go. But I'm pretty sure.
And when it comes to Iran, another pillar to touch on, we had already seen Donald Trump sign another executive order when it comes to sanctions on that country, saying this isn't something that I want to do, but I believe we have to do it, and I will use the tools at my disposal should I have to. He had also previously said that he believed that Iran was strong at the moment, despite many analysts around the world saying that it has been weakened, particularly through the actions of Israel. Do you think Israel and the United States are aligned on policy when it comes to Iran? Do you think Israel would like something further than perhaps Washington's prepared to give right now?
Yeah, I don't think they're aligned. And I think that was one of the reasons why you saw Netanyahu saying something about there should be no daylight between us as the fire roared between them, so that our enemies don't sense, any kind of weakness. I think that Israel would like to see a regime change, whether that's the people rising up and deposing the supreme leader, or whether it's something more violent from the outside. And I also think Israel just feels like, boy, they've been waiting all these years for their showdown blow, and finally, the air defenses are down in Iran, and the ring of proxies, they've just been sort of spraying their hose all over those for the last several months. This is Israel's opportunity. They would say it's a once in a, Netanyahu sees himself as Winston Churchill. This is his Churchill moment. Iran is the reason he has said that he gets up in the morning to sort of deter and stop Iran. So I do believe that he feels like he's missing an opportunity here. Maybe that was the bargain they struck, and that's why Netanyahu's upper lip was sweating, because he got rid of Gaza, but he didn't get to launch his military strike on Iran, which we know that he needs U.S. support and backing and weapons to do that.
And Laura, just briefly, as we wrap up this part of our programme, of course, the international community will have been listening to what was said tonight. Of course, not just other countries in the region, Arab countries, for example. What do you think they will be making of this?
Well, I think that they're going to be, pretty unhappy and scrambling. But look, we just picked a fight with Canada. These are just crazy days. So I guess what I would say to those Arab states, heads of state, is you're not alone. Talk to Canada.
Laura Blumenfeld there, the former State Department Senior Policy Advisor on the Middle East peace process. Always good to have your insights. Well, before we